reconvene. It's our pleasure to invite up Robert Pacheco as a member of the Occupational Safety and Health Appeals Board. Assemblymember Pacheco is a former colleague, spent many a long hour together in committee hearings, and it's nice to see you again.
Nice to see you. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Nice to see all of you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Dr. Yeager's waiting around. Before we start, I'm sorry. Can we lift the call, please, on Dr. Ken Yeager as member of the Air Resources Board?
Senator Cedillo?
2-2.
Senator Cedillo? Cedillo, aye.
That nomination goes to the floor of the Senate by a 3-2 vote. It will be taken up forthwith. Thank you very much. Thank you, Sam. Appreciate it. Okay. Mr. Pacheco, welcome back. Is there anybody that you want to introduce? Family, friend, foe?
I'll have a number of staff members from the OSHA Appeals Board with me here today, but my wife couldn't make it today. She had things to take care of.
Well,
someone had to work.
Yes, somebody had to work.
Tell her hello for us, will you, please?
Thank you.
All right, sir. We have a number of questions for you, but why don't we begin with a statement from you and maybe a little bit of a focus statement. I know you're familiar and aware of the confirmation hearing we had for Candace Traeger, where we raised a lot of significant issues about calendaring and about the fine structure and the settlements of Cal OSHA Appeals Board. And Levy, if you could be sort of directly responsive to some of those issues that we had raised the last time.
I'd be happy to. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. I appreciate the opportunity to be here before you for you to consider my confirmation and reappointment by the governor. I do want to say that I have enjoyed the time that I've been on the appeals board. I think it's been very productive for me in terms of my learning of different things, but more importantly, I think my service to the state of California. I do take my responsibilities very seriously. I have, as you know, I'm a student of the law, and I have a great deal of respect for the law. I believe that it's important to be unbiased and to interpret the law as it is written and not to write the law, as that's the role of the legislature. The board has had a period of growth. We've come from a very difficult period of time where we discovered that the board had very significantly increased the backlog of cases. And I call that justice denied and safety basically delayed. And that was, I think, something that was a challenge to me when I first went on the board, and then we talked about it. We said we need to deal with this. And that is probably one of the causes, and that is one of the causes of the concerns that have been raised and that were raised in front of the both the Senate Labor Committee and here in Rules Committee when Ms. Traeger was confirmed. And those are concerns that we take seriously. We're not ignoring them. We feel they are important. I look at the board and the steps that the board has taken in a number of ways. I think the board has been productive, has been proactive, been progressive, and has been responsive. And I take those in that line because we coming into the board, there was a very difficult period where we saw that the cases that have been piled up were just out of hand, and we had to do something about it. To be productive, we had to eliminate that backlog, and by that, we had to take steps that obviously were not going to make some folks happy. But then once we have done that, we have removed the backlog. I'm very pleased to say that all cases are now being heard between the time that the federal regulations require us to have them. As you know, that we had a lawsuit against us against the state for not being in compliance with the federal regulations. Cases were delayed. I mean, we had cases that were 6, 7, almost 7 years old sometimes, some of them. and they needed to be removed, and we did. We've gone through and removed that backlog. We're now hearing cases within 10 months. That's what we're required to do. In order to do that, we had to...
I hate to interrupt you, but just so I can think about this. And so what was the number that you started with? And then if you could take us to where you're at, and then...
I can give it to you in this...
Now.
Let me give it to you in this manner. I kind of went through and jotted some notes on it. In 2005, we had 4,651 cases docketed, and appeals disposed of were 4,300. So that meant we disposed of less cases than we took in. In 2006, we had 5,300 new appeals came in, but we disposed of 5,600. 2007, we took in 5,400. We disposed of 7,000 cases. In 2008, we took in 5,100 and disposed of almost 7,000 cases again. In 2009, where we are now, we've taken in 2,200 cases, and we've disposed of 2,800. We're working hard. We are using and maximizing our resources. You all know the same thing, that all of us, all our budgets have been reduced, our staffing has been reduced, our resources have been reduced, and we are now doing the best we can with the resources we have. One of the concerns I know that has raised, because of the numbers I just told you, is that there were a number of cases that were booked and double booked, and in some cases triple booked, in order to get the cases rolling. We tried to remove those cases what we call low-hanging fruit, meaning those cases that were easily resolved by settlement, by quick disposition. And those of you who have practiced law know that the judicial system went through exactly the same process. And Mr. Steinberg and Mr. Cedillo, I think you will remember, back in I think it was 1998, 1990 to 1995, thereabouts. The court system was backlogged with a number of cases, and they had to go through the process of removing that backlog, and they went through the same thing basically we did. They began to expedite the cases, no continuances, they were sent to arbitration, mediation, all kinds of things, until that case log was back manageable. And so we unfortunately had the similar problem. As you know, workers' compensation now has a similar problem that we had, a huge backlog, and those need to be removed as well. But that's for them to control. But I wanted to just say that what we have done is we took a difficult situation now and made it work. We're now, and I know the issue, one of the major issues has been the scheduling. We started out this year in January scheduling hearings, 197 in January, 200 in February, 157 in March, 186 in April, 181 in May, 176 in June, 146 in July. And one of the things that Ms. Traeger said was that we were going to try to eliminate and reduce that double booking. In August, we only have now 29 cases that were set for hearing, and I don't know how many of those actually, because we don't have the final numbers. In September, we have 85 cases set for hearing, and in October we have 89 cases set for hearing. That's a big drop in the number of cases set for hearing that will eliminate the double booking, where you'll have people from the division not having to appear handle two cases at one time. If you look, and I actually can give you an updated schedule that takes you all the way through October.
If you don't mind, why don't we see that? Because
I'd be happy to.
Because this is the crux of the concern, as you know, Mr. Pacheco, is that on the one hand, when you're dealing with a lot of cases, those post-scheduling challenges, on the other hand, we know that if you schedule too many cases at one time, there's a huge incentive for parties to settle, yes. And even if the cases do not involve, as you described, low-hanging fruit. I mean, there may be real issues. The citations may be invalid, may be valid. You don't know. We don't know what the circumstances are. So what's troubling to me is that we had Ms. Traeger's confirmation hearing. When was that? In January. On June the 19th, 46 individuals write a letter to you and to Ms. Traeger, in which, and Mr. Carter, in which they complain about this layered scheduling. They say in June there were 32 days at 6 locations with 3 or more cases scheduled for the same judge, same location, same time. There are 14 days with 4 cases scheduled with 1 day and 5 cases scheduled. And so that was 2 months and 12 days ago.
Right. Let me.
Is that one?
That's a correct statement, and
okay.
But it's incorrect in terms of the number of hearings. If I can, as we go through, I can touch on that. In June, there were 176 cases scheduled for hearing. 123 of them ultimately settled. 15 of them went to hearing. So there were only, in the entire month, 15 hearings.
That may be because other parties felt like they needed to settle because there wasn't enough time to have their case heard.
Right, and I'm not disagreeing with that point because, as you know, having been in litigation, you know what happens when you're at the courthouse steps. A lot of times you do settle at the end. But I don't think that statistically the numbers stand up in terms of forced settlement. I say that because statistically 80% of the cases have settled. And we went back I think it was 8-10 years. I think we did a calculation, I think, for 8 or 10 years. For that period of time, the percentage has stayed consistently around 80%. So it isn't, and I think Ms. Candace indicated to you that she said there, based on the calculation, there was maybe a 4% increase that we had calculated. So if there's an attributed amount to force having cases heard more rapidly, the only thing we could identify was a 4% increase over historical data.
So okay, but I want to get your central point here because you get a complaint from these 46 people. It's fairly rare for people who appear before the board to be willing to put their name on a letter because obviously you'd be afraid that, oh my God, put my neck on the line or my client's neck on the line. I mean, and not that you would do that, but that's just sort of a natural feeling. And the fact that they were willing to do it says, whoa, there's something that they are really concerned about here. So the question, as I'm looking at the calendar here, and I'm not sure quite how to interpret this, but if I'm reading this right, August 11th, for example, there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cases set. Is that one judge?
No, and I don't have an extra copy. So
well, here,
I can tell you that
read from here.
On the right hand,
if you could hand it to the witness here, please. If you look at August 11, I just want to understand how to interpret it.
I'll be happy to try to identify that. On the right hand side, it says identifies hearing type. So, and I check marked the ones that are hearings to let you know that those actually would be hearings. The others are pre-hearings, or can be done by phone conference or things like that.
Okay, so only the things checked are hearings, but it's one judge per category.
Right, and then the ALJ is listed at the very, very far right.
Okay.
So you'll see that we don't have a lot of duplication. And what we had to take into consideration, we listened to those folks and their concerns. And what we did is we were concerned that we were booking the investigators to testify at hearings that were obviously being held at the same time, maybe 2 hearings at one time. They had to prepare for 2. So you can see that the identification of the district, look at where it says docket number, and you'll see first the date, and then you'll see R something and D something. That tells you the region and district. So you can see they come from different regions, different districts. And so that we're not double booking them as we had before.
Okay, and the check marks are pre-hearings?
No, the check marks are hearings.
Are the hearings?
Yes.
Okay, so you've got. I'm looking at September 2nd. And September 2nd, Judge HNJ or Judge RF. No, God, I'm not reading this correctly.
It's on the very far right is the judge.
Okay, so you've got Judge RF has one hearing, Judge BF has one hearing, Judge DR on September the 2nd has two hearings, both at 10 o'clock.
Right, and what we're doing on some of those is we are now scheduling so that one's set for 9 o'clock and the other one's set for 1:30. And most hearings last around 2 to 4 hours at the most.
Okay, so I think, hold on here.
What's the use of our statistics about their settlement rates? They're slightly.
No, I understand, but I think this is helpful, but I don't think as we're sitting here in real time have a chance to really analyze this, because what we want to see really is whether or not going forward here you have spread it out in such a way that says that at most, for example, a judge will have 2 hearings scheduled.
Correct.
And even that at the same time is problematic. But I know, because I was an ALJ,
right.
if that sometimes you do that, although
it depends on the difficulty of the case. I mean, if you have 2 fairly easy cases, you can dispose of them in an hour or 2, and you still. We got to use our time productively. I mean, sometimes you will have in the times past and the years when I told you about the total backlog that we had, they were scheduling at that time maybe 1 hearing a week. Sometimes at the most 2 hearings per week. And so all these cases were backing up because they were not being heard.
So, all right. So here's what we want to do.
Sure.
What I want to do is, with our fine staff here, and of course the Republican staff, I want to go over this. I mean, so how far ahead are you scheduled?
I think that goes through October.
That goes through October. Okay. And the witnesses, I would like, if they've seen this schedule, because I assume it's public.
We publish. We publish it as far as we can. You know, the cases are set like 3 or 4 months ahead of time.
No, but what you handed me is public, correct?
That is the last information that we have generated. I'm not sure how much of that is published. I couldn't tell you because I don't really know how.
Well, it is now.
Which is fine.
Published and public are 2 different questions.
Okay, published in public. Okay,
right.
Fair enough.
But
right.
At the last stakeholder meeting, we actually handed the more current listing of cases, and one of the people that had been complaining about the double setting, when he had a chance to review that the scheduling had been substantially reduced, I think he may not have been totally satisfied. We don't expect that to be the case, but we expected, at least from that point on, he understood that we had made great headway in the reduction of the scheduling.
Okay. So let us, we can take other questions, of course. I think one of the things that might be important is to hear from some of the witnesses, including some of the witnesses who have some concerns. The other thing I'd like you to be responsive to is, as a lawyer, the appellate court precedent, or let me put it this way, the law, and I think I wrote this law, AB 1127, back in 1998, provided for a $5,000 minimum fine for willfully failing to protect a worker from serious injury or death. And one controversy that arose the last time with Ms. Traeger is that the board has been sort of on its own, without authority, been settling those kinds of cases for less than a $5,000 fine. So I'd love to hear your response to that.
Well, Senator, if you recall, recently we heard the Senate, the United States Senate, interview Ms. Sotomayor, and she was asked similar questions of a nature on cases that either had not been posed or presented to her as yet. And she said, I will give due consideration to those cases and treat them fairly and honestly and give, I think, what should be a fair result.
I'm not asking you about Roe v. Wade. You know?
I know, but I'm trying to address the issue. The issue is this: there are a number of these cases pending before the board. As a quasi-judicial body, we have to be considerate of how we deal with those. And so I may tell you that I have some concerns, and I think in my letter to you addressed to the Senate about my reconfirmation, I addressed that I said I had some concerns about how that issue is being dealt with, and I think we need to give more direction to the ALJs on how that's being handled. And I believe that we'll be dealing with that. And
my question's a policy. It's a pure policy question. It's a matter of policy. Do you believe the board has the authority under Labor Code Section 6409.1 to impose anything less than a minimum penalty of $5,000 on employers, I'll get it right this time, who fail to report a serious injury or death of a worker to Cal OSHA? That's the question. It's a matter of policy.
Senator, I read your alleged counsel's opinion and his thoughts on how it works and how it applies. Let me say to you that an employer is not cited under 6409.1. Never is. The division is not authorized to cite an employer under that section. They can only cite them under the regulatory code. That's 336, Section 336. And 342A is the penalty section. That's the only way they can cite them. So, as a lawyer, I think
you don't think
know,
that section's not applicable to?
Not that it's not applicable. It's just that if you look at the interpretation of how it's being applied, the division cites based on its own regulatory framework. The director actually, when 6409.1 was enacted, the director then enacted a change to the director's regulation, Section 336. And in Section 336, that was imposed under the penalty side 342A. It says that the director, that the regulation now shall impose a penalty, shall impose a penalty. Senator, when you drafted the regulation, when you drafted the law under the Labor Code, it says may. We know that it's inconsistent. You cannot have a director's regulation that is inconsistent with the statutory law. And I'm just, you asked me for a very broad approach. I cannot go beyond that, but
so
to tell you...
You don't feel that the regulation applies because the statute's permissive, the regulation's mandatory, and
the statute is permissive.
You choose to follow the statute. Okay, I want to hear from, let's hear from witnesses. Witnesses in support first. Witnesses either in opposition or expressing concern. And you can identify which.
Can I just on this question, Mr. President?
Yes, of course.
For clarification, so there's a conflict. Did your law have permissive language or mandatory or directive
Well, the
language?
truth is, wrote the thing 10 years ago. I don't really remember, but I think it was permissive. It may have been, but well, let's hear from the lawyers, okay? And then we can. It is may. It's may in the statute, no question about it.
May of not less than.
May what?
May of not less than.
may be assessed. It says may be assessed a civil penalty of not less than $5,000. So, you know,
So that
so
means
you
it
can
could-
either look at the may, or you can look at the language of not less than, and that's why we have courts.
The other alternative might be
right?
it might be zero.
Right.
Right. Sure. Oh, that can't be. Okay.
I'm sorry, sir. That's what you wrote.
Okay, go ahead. Let's hear from the witnesses here.
Thank you, Senator Steinberg, members of the committee. Jeremy Smith on behalf of the California Labor Federation. I'll get to the specifics of that $5,000 penalty and our thoughts on that in a moment. Sure. I'm not a lawyer, so the lawyer will start. The non-lawyer will start, but the lawyers will fill in a few minutes. First of all, I want to acknowledge the fact that over the last 8 months, at the behest of the Labor Committee's oversight hearing and Ms. Traeger's first appearance here in January, the Appeals Board has had some advisory committees and brought labor and management together to speak about issues that we're concerned about. I want to stress that it took the legislature and you, Mr. Steinberg, to make them do that. But they are doing it, and I'd like to thank Mr. Pacheco for taking part in those, as well as the staff of the Appeals Board. Michael Wimberly is out there. He's been part of that process. We're concerned about not only the $5,000 penalty issue, but a few other issues that lead DOSH and employers to settle cases, whether it's over scheduling, whether it's lack of continuances for legitimate reasons, whether it's a myriad of issues that come before the board. There's no doubt, according to the letter from the DOSH staff, that they are persuaded by the standards and practices of the board to settle sometimes. They're overworked. There's furlough days. Employers appeal everything, sometimes properly, sometimes improperly, but there's a lot of work to be done. And the way the Appeals Board got through the backlog over the last few years, the practices they put in place to do that are still going on, and it, in our opinion, creates a culture of settlement at the Appeals Board. I think, Senator, you hit on that very, very well earlier.
Which is a two-sided coin, by the way. It's not necessarily a terrible thing. It depends, right? I mean,
we certainly do not want a backlog. A backlog does not help anybody.
Right.
But we don't need to not have a backlog at all costs.
Question for you, because I want to make sure we move along here. Have you had a chance to look at the September and October calendars that Mr. Pacheco described?
We had we have not. We had a advisory committee on August 6th. They did pass out calendars from then, at that point, and there were ALJs who had hearings scheduled at the same time still. So they had fixed the
but you haven't had a chance to look at the new ones. That's
We have
okay.
not. We have not.
I just want to know who has, and whether or not the new schedules are responsive to the complaints and concerns that we've heard.
Well, the DOSH inspectors wrote their letter, and frankly, that's as far as they thought they could probably go without getting in too much trouble. So they couldn't be here today to
And that
speak
was
to
June
that.
19th. So now the calendar's the calendar. Is it better or is it not? That's what I want to know. Finish your testimony, and then let's
Right,
move on.
Because
Okay.
I think one of the ways I appreciate this, your leadership on this, Mr. President, because what we've heard is your concern is a culture of settlement, but I share the perspective of the president that this is what we do. So, but there's been a representation that the measure of settlements before was that about 80% of the cases settle, and that the increase was only 4%, or was 4%. And so I don't think that that's sufficient for you, and it may not be, but to bring to us this presentation that now there's this problem of a culture of settlement, it should be measured. I mean, and I think it is capable of being measured. So if you said, well, before there was 100 cases would go to hearing, and now only 4 go. And then we have somebody who says, well, actually, of the 100 cases, 80 would settle, and now 84 settle. I mean, I don't know. I mean, you could still object to that. That obviously might be a perspective, which that might be the tipping point for you. But I would like to hear a measure that's quantitative on the concern.
Well, our concern today is with Mr. Pacheco and the fact that he's been on this board for 4 years now, and it took literally an act of the pro tem at Ms. Traeger's hearing to get the appeals board to start making changes. They weren't making changes. The scheduling, from what I've heard today, it seems like it might be getting better. We're thankful for that. We are of the opinion that this these scheduling fixes could have happened much sooner, and we shudder to think of the number of cases when DOST inspectors were literally having to be presenting cases at the same time to the same judge on the same day. How many of those cases got settled? And I've seen the statistics from the appeals board, and
but that's measured. There's been a measure of that.
I would just say statistics are statistics, and we have to trust what they tell us. But what they've shown us around, not with statistics, is that they do not change what they do at the appeals board unless they're made to, and so that leads me to wonder exactly what the stats are they're showing me and how they arrive at them. And we have talked about stats at length at the advisory committee hearings, and I've frankly not been swayed by all of the stats they've shown me. Mm-hmm. So I would simply say that settlements are happening. I've heard firsthand from DOST inspectors that they're forced to settle. Whatever the percentage number is, it's happening. And in our opinion, when a settlement happens for pennies on the dollar, a workplace, an employer, it's just a cost of doing business, and it doesn't keep workplaces safe.
So I hate to inconvenience people here, but we're in the last 2 weeks of the session, and we've got 36 bills on call. And so what I would like to do, if that's all right, to in respect to all the other members' schedules out there, is take a recess here for about 20 minutes, so that we can lift the calls, and then we'll come back and we'll continue.
Okay.
Fair enough?
Fair enough. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sure.